Everything's back from the powder coaters, all the new parts are here, so today on Project 380 I'm going to be upgrading the diff bushers, installing new seals and putting the diff back in the car. So you've got your diff out of your car and your diff bushings are looking a little bit worse for wear. These diff bushings are now 20 plus years old and rubber over time does deteriorate and go brittle. But the standard bushings are quite flexible and you can move them around, mainly due to the rubber and these voids down each side. So why would you want to upgrade your diff bushings? And that's just a few simple reasons. One, it's going to improve gear changes. The diff isn't going to be able to rock us round as much, and because it's directly connected to the gearbox isn't going to move as much and your gear stick is going to stay where it needs to stay. It's also going to improve the road feel, the traction, and it's going to let the suspension do what the suspension has to do. So it's time to upgrade your diff bushings, and there's a few options out there for you to choose from. The first being the standard bushings. The second being void space fillers, which go in the standard bushings just to stiffen them up a little bit. The third is a polyurethane bushing with a soft rating, which has no gaps in it whatsoever, and is a very good choice to upgrade the diff bushings. The fourth option is another harder polyurethane bushing which is almost solid, and the fifth choice is complete solid mountings, but that isn't for everyone. So I'm going to swap out my old polyurethane bushings which are a little soft, and I'm swapping out to some harder polyurethane bushings that I've purchased from Boffy Racing. Now on their website there are three different options: 70A, 85A and 90A. 90A being the hardest, which I've gone for. And there is a warning on their website that these will rattle your teeth out. But this isn't my daily driver car, and I thought I'd try going from a softer bush to a really harder polyurethane bush. So removing these standard bushings is a little bit tricky, but these are actually two separate halves, just joined by the rubber in the middle. I've tried to clean it up a little bit here so you can hopefully see the split. So we first need to try and separate these two halves. So what I'm going to do is grab a drill bit, go right down the side here and tear through the rubber, so these parts are completely separate. So when you've made a complete mess and your garage smells like burning rubber, go ahead and push the middle out. Then we're going to go ahead and flip this over and work from the other side. It's very hard to see, but the split is there, and what we want to do is try and fold this a little bit inwards, try and separate those two bits a little bit more, and then knock it through. If you concentrate on just getting out one side first, the second half should be really easy to get out, as it's not got anything to force against. Put the new bush in, we now need to make sure this is really clean, and if we have nicked the surface with our hammer or chisel, we need to make sure it's nice and smooth as well. So I'm just going to take a bit of emery cloth and go at it for a little while. But I don't have to worry about that, because this is fresh out the powder coaters, it's already nice and clean. And as you can see, I've already had a play with the new bushings in this side. And I've found there's a few differences fitting these new bushings compared to the old softer polyurethane ones that I had before. The older ones you could put in by hand and you don't need any tools to do them, just force them in. But because the new ones are almost solid, I found I had to press them in. And I've had a little bit of a play around which way to do this, and I've found the way that works the easiest for me. Lubricant is definitely going to be your friend. So this diff bushing kit from Boffy Racing consists of 3 parts. Bush number 1, diff bush number 2 and the metal inner insert. It's a bit hard to see on camera, but these bushes have actually got labelled diff 1 and diff 2, and they are slightly different. The shoulders on the bushings are 2 different thicknesses. Bushing number 1 has to go on the underneath, and bushing number 2 has to go on top. So I'm going to start off by putting in diff bush number 1 first. I'm going to start off by putting an excessive amount of lubricant around the outside. I'm just using a little bit of silicone grease. I've also put a load of grease inside the diff itself. Ideally you would want to use a press for this, but I don't have such luxuries. So I'm simply going to lay the diff bushing in there. I'm going to get a bit of scrap metal to distribute the pressure a bit more evenly, and then slowly do the vise up, keeping an eye on making sure the diff bushing is going in nice and square. Now, diff bushing number 1 is excessively tighter than diff bushing number 2. Diff bushing number 2 is a lot easier to get in, but I'd still lubricate it up. This one I have found you can put in by hand. Now for the metal inner insert, this is going to require a fair bit of lubricant. The metal insert is also going to have to be pressed in, and I've found it easiest to go from the top down. Now be careful, make sure in the first couple of millimeters that the insert is going in nice and square. If it seems to skew off to the side, just release the pressure and start again. Now that the diff bushes are all in, I think it's as good a time as any to put in the axle seals at the side of the diff housing. Before fitting the seal, make sure the mating face is nice and clean and free of sharp edges. I've got some brand new seals, they're genuine Mazda ones. I've purchased these from Boffy Racing. Now usually with these types of seal I would use a seal driver, but as this has got a rubber skirt, I'm going to have to use something a little bit different. I would suggest if you've got a big enough socket to slide just over the skirt but not overhanging the edge of the seal, I'd probably use that. But in my case I've found just a little bit of metal that slides over the skirt nicely and fits on the seal quite snug. So I'm just going to put a very small bit of oil to the outside of the seal. This is going to hopefully make it slide in a little bit easier. You'll know the seal is home and up to the shoulder, as when you're hitting it the pitch will change. And now the rear diff housing is complete and ready for the diff to be inserted. Before inserting it, make sure this mating face is nice and clean and make sure there's no dirt or debris inside the diff housing. The same with the diff, make sure there is no dirt and debris on the sealing surface and no debris on the ring gears or inside the internals of the diff. So to seal the diff to the rear housing, we need to put a little bit of RTV around this mating face here. You don't need to go excessive, but I've got a weird relationship with RTV. Now to put the bolts in. Hopefully you've remembered where they all come from, as there's a couple of different length bolts. These need to be torqued from 17 foot-pound to 20 foot-pound in a cross-like pattern. Now I'm going to let that dry and scrape off the excess RTV. Now is a good time to put in the breather at the top and the two bungs. you'll know the difference between the drain bung and the level bung, as the drain bung has a magnet in it. Now I've tightened up the drain bung, but I haven't fully tightened the level bung, as that's going to come out again when I fill up the oil. But I don't want to do it up tight now, as I've put new copper washers in it and I won't be able to reuse it. Now this is usually where you'd put the diff up into the car, but I'm going to be doing things a little bit differently. Because I've had to switch out my subframes and I've had a new subframe powder coated, I'm going to be putting the diff into the subframe and then the subframe and diff up into the car. So I've got my new subframe back from the powder coaters, and of course I had to get it done in the same pink to match the front subframe. But before I put the diff on, I just want to apply a little bit of copper slip to the studs where the diff sits. And now all I've got to do is drop the subframe into the diff. If you were doing this the other way around, you'd use a trolley jack to lift the diff up into the subframe. Next is for the diff stop washers. I've got some nice brand new Mazda OEM ones, as the old ones were pretty much rotted out. These need to be torqued from 61 foot-pound to 72 foot-pound. And then just tighten up the two smaller nuts. So that's the diff all back together and in the subframe, and it's looking pretty good. All I've got to do now is put it into the car. I'm not going to film that bit, as I've parked the car too close to the wall. All you're going to see is my butt, and it's pretty sketchy how I'm going to put it back in. So that's all for this episode, and I'm afraid the next episode is going to be a little bit of a wait, but trust me, it's going to be worth it. I'm waiting on some pretty cool parts to arrive. So join me next time, and don't forget to like and subscribe.